Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a podcast where a group of friends gather together, share music with each other, an album at a time, and take a little book club for music. I'm Petey Rave, and I'm pretty excited about today's album that we're going to be talking about. So much so that I didn't even come up with anything clever to say. Here with me is my team, my squad, my crew, my gang. What up? We've got David.
Everybody has a right to be heard. That doesn't mean I have to listen.
Mm-hmm. We've got Drew.
Never say gang again.
And of course, we still have our wonderful guest, the one, the only, Jack D.
Boy, shitting howdy, I'm an author because I barely write and I complain about how I don't have any time to write.
Yeah. We're here to talk about
real.
Yes. We're here to talk about music. We're here to talk about an album. The album is going to be provided. Well, it is provided by Drew. Drew, what have you got for us this week?
Well, I decided to go with a band that I went with sort of the band that a couple of members of this band formed after this. I thought it was more the speed of the group at the time. They were more rocky. But the band that they were in before this was a post-hardcore band that I very, very much loved. One of the only post-hardcore bands I still listen to after the age of 15. And that's At the Drive-In, with the song that has all the songs I think people remember on it, which is Relationship of Command.
Mm-hmm. David, what were your expectations coming into this album?
My expectations coming into this album, PD Rave, were not much. Like Drew, I think that this has been said a few times on the Record Breakers podcast. Drew and I share a mutual love of the Mars Volta, the band that eventually came after At the Drive-In. So that was my first connection to At the Drive-In. I went in excited to hear what this was about. The post-hardcore genre name is a fascinating one. Mm-hmm. I know nothing about it, but I'm always intrigued. So let's do the thing.
Yeah. Jack, what were your expectations coming into this album?
So I knew that Record Breakers is full of prog lovers. So knowing that this was prog, I knew that I would enjoy it. And that's about as much as I said. I thought to myself, I can have positive expectations going in. And since I am slightly younger, I can definitely find a lot more enjoyment in some pretty unrefined stuff, I guess I should say. So let's see if my suspicions prove correct in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a little bit of experience with At the Drive-In. I've listened to a couple of these songs many times over. And so I have a little bit of experience, and I had a bit of some expectations. I haven't listened to this album as a whole, I think, ever, which is I think a thing with me and a lot of music of this era, where I know like a song or two or three of these songs that I love, namely things like Constantine by Something Corporate. I love that song. Have not listened to the entire Something Corporate album ever.
Oh man, I should bring on Something Corporate. I love Something Corporate. That's my era of emo.
Or like there's like 3 brand new songs that I absolutely adore, and like haven't listened to the entire album. But this is of that ilk, where I have a couple of songs that I love that are on this record, but haven't listened to the whole album. So I had some expectations, but wasn't sure exactly what I was getting into as a fullness. But let's talk about this album musically. Drew, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the theme song that you bring up?
Well, like I said, post-hardcore isn't something that like I listen to a lot of now. I used to be super into like your Fugazis and your AFIs and your census fails and all that sort of stuff, right? But there's a certain simplicity to some of it. Like if you go back, it's Black Flag and it's Husker Du and it's Fugazi. It's not exactly like intricate music. But there was something about At the Drive-In that I always loved because they added that like really kind of weird composition style. That once you listen to this, you sort of see where like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes total sense that like 3 of these members went on to make a prog band. Like that, duh, of course they did. Like I said, unlike their contemporaries around them, which was like your AFIs and the Used and things like that, Census Fail I think was around the same time, that like early aughts, mid 90s, early aughts sort of thing. Unlike them, they, while still having an emphasis on the abrasive aggression that was sort of in their vocals, like the pushing it forward and sort of pushing in your face, that like very hardcore punk ethics or ethos to it, I guess. Not ethics. I don't know. Ethics.
Drew,
that feeling.
Can you do something for me, Drew, please?
Yes.
What is post-hardcore? Because
So-
I'm hearing a lot, and I saw that genre attached to At the Drive-In.
Mhm.
Can you tell me what post-hardcore is?
So the idea of post-hardcore and where it like started in the 80s with like your Husker Dus and your Black Flags and stuff like that was the idea that there was this aggression in the hardcore punk rock scene that was getting out. You were having a lot of like Minor Threat and Judge and like a lot of those like very, very aggressive, very, very loud, very, very raucous bands coming out. But a lot of it was unrefined. So you had bands like Husker Du, like Black Flag, like even to a lesser extent, like a Gorilla Biscuits, that took that sort of aggression and that sort of angst and that sort of anger and those emotions there that was being pushed by that hardcore scene, but sort of put more melody to it and less noise. It came out of like a more art punk scene, especially in like DC and Texas and stuff like that, where they were sort of getting, the punk scene in general wanted a little bit more, the musicians in the punk rock scene wanted a little bit more musicianship to it, which is why when it became very, very popular in the mainstream, you would get bands like The Used and you would get bands like AFI that had a lot more emphasis on the pretty parts, I would say, of the idea, but putting more emphasis on the music and putting more emphasis on the thought of it. It comes from a very post-punk sort of DIY like ethics to it, but mixing in like a little bit more aggression the hardcore punk scene was known for.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Drew.
Not a problem. I may have in high school read many of books on the early 80s emo and hardcore scenes.
Yeah. The stereotype is that post-hardcore is the name emo bands gave themselves when they didn't want to be called emo.
Yeah, there
That was the
is
joke.
that underlying joke. Yeah, but
I'm not emo.
to me-
I'm post-hardcore.
to me, emo feels more promise ring,
Which, yeah.
if that makes sense. More promise ring, more Get Up Kids, whereas like The Used and AFI and At the Drive-In and Census Fail and Pierce the Veil, that feels more post-hardcore to me. But yes, there is a lot of emo kids that were like, we want to be more aggressive because we're angry. And it's like, okay, yeah, but you're still kind of an emo band, man.
Yes.
Come on.
Yes.
And that's sort of where At the Drive-In fits more on the side of they wanted to take this hardcore punk aggression and the DIY art punk ideals and make it something different and really put like a lot of musicality to it. To me, the lineup in this is where my mind goes when I think of the lineup of At the Drive-In, because Cedric Bixler and Omar Rodriguez, two of the guys who went on to form Mars Volta, I think those two guitar players together creatively mix so well that that is where you get like those underpinnings and those weird twists and turns in their music. It is abrasive to a point, but I think that sort of adds to the manic nature of what the music underlines, which I think is really cool.
David, how would you describe this album musically? What would be the themes, elements that stand out for you?
Well, I know what Drew was talking about of what those genres stem from, emo and hardcore, and I definitely got what felt like a hybrid of those. There was a sense of chaos, maybe a little bit of controlled chaos in all of this. In terms of instrumentation, in terms of songwriting, there is a chaotic feel without it being completely off the rails, say like the Velvet Underground or something, where it's just bordering on incomprehensible. There is a vision to this that I really respected, and that there is a chaotic musicality that blends hardcore music, like closer to maybe like the almost. There is a almost early thrash kind of chaoticness to it, while still being melodic and kind of 2000s.
Yeah. Jack, how would you describe this album musically?
I really didn't want to get into these kinds of comparisons, so I guess I'll start with saying that Drew, hearing you describe like post-hardcore definitely solidifies my overall feelings, which is that this is messy and dirty enough, and I can definitely hear enough of melodic nature come through for it to be a pleasurable noise. And moving on into my actual comparison, this really feels like a lot of stuff that I was listening to when I was 19, just shoving it into a blender and that kind of thing. A lot of imagery, especially in some of the songs, I'll talk about them forward, had a lot of poetic nature to them, which was appreciated, but it definitely struck me as that period for certain. And I guess that is what I would say, is that it was that kind of delightful noise that you associate with this styles of music.
Yeah, I think it's an album and a band where it's like that intensity and that energy and that manic energy works in its favor in so many ways, and how it bounces back and forth, and in the frenetic nature of it. And music is just so cool on that regard, and it's really cool and creative in what it does with different songs, and and we can get into some of the key tracks now, and because when you break it down to some of the tracks and how they do some really cool things within the tracks and different things like musically, Drew, what will be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, it starts off with Arc Arsenal. The driving sort of drums on this one, I think that snare rhythm pushes it forward, and the way the guitars, the dueling guitars, sort of play off of that sound, and sort of sound really like the drum beat is simple, but the guitars and the way they weave in and out are not, and it sort of adds this like a sort of weird off-putting nature to it. One-Armed Scissor, the guitar lick that starts at about 20 seconds in is, in my opinion, if the Dutch angle in cinematography had a guitar lick attached to it, that would be this guitar lick that starts at like 20 seconds in and goes through the verse. It's just that right amount of like off-puttingly weird that makes you feel just sort of uncomfortable. And that constantly weirdly turning guitar line is actually what like that brought me to like that weird like emo post-hardcore like sort of scene when I was younger, like that musical feeling. And Cosmonaut, every band from this era that was like an emo band with even a little bit of hardcore edge to them, Fall of Troy comes to mind, Chiodos, like all of that, like they all had one song on every album for every tour that was specifically to get the mosh pit going. And Cosmonaut is that for this album. And yet it still doesn't lose the weird guitars and the weird like time signature changes and the weird movements of it all. And yet it's still a song that's just about like, nah, we're going to shove each other around for a little bit. And I appreciate that.
Back in the day, they called this Jump the Fuck Up.
Yep.
Yes.
Fair.
Get in the pit, try to love someone.
Get up off of that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. David, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Mannequin Republic. First of all, when I was listening to this track, and then it's kind of stuck with me throughout the album like a worm, like an earworm, I started hearing an influence that I hadn't even considered. Even being a big fan of the Mars Volta, I had not considered this. With Cedric's voice, I was hearing Zach De La Rocha. And I was saying to myself, if Zach De La Rocha wasn't in Rage Against the Machine and rapping, this is exactly what he would sound like. I was hearing Zach De La Rocha in this, and I meant that in a positive way, because that's just what I was hearing. I heard some Rage Against the Machine influence. Maybe not contemporaries. I think Rage was a little bit before these guys, so maybe the influence is there. The outro of Invalid Litter Department was really, really brilliant with how it just really let itself go, where the chaos of this album just really let itself go. And I think that was really enjoyable. Also, Extracurricular was one that was a bit more coherent and not as chaotic as the rest of the album. But still pretty high energy, and I liked that one too.
Mm-hmm. Jack, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
I certainly loved One Armed Scissor, and Drew, I think you mentioned with the guitar riff, these across the board have some excellent guitar hooks, but I especially love the hook in One Armed Scissor, and I have here in my notes, because I always need to make point of them when they happen. If you give me an eerie audio skit at the end of your, I am guaranteed to love it. Almost like if a song is enjoyable and then you have just some weird stuff like that at the end, I will without fail never skip it. I will listen to that because I love that kind of crap. Sleepwalk Capsules was really fun. I also thought that might be one that David mentioned, but Invalid Sleep Department is also I think was especially fun with the way it was playing around with these weird breakdowns and again those odd time signature changes and everything. And again, I always hate to I say like I hate to be reductive, but I think I love these comparisons just as much as anybody. But Mannequin absolutely made me think of the Guilty Gear song. It was just so much dang fun.
Yeah.
It just gave me that level of pumped up energy.
Yeah. There's always some fantastic about Guilty Gear music. Anybody who watches,
You weren't having a heavy day after hearing that one.
no. Yeah, there's some great songs. Yeah, Invalid Litter Department is a fascinating like song, and it goes into kind of like heavy subject matter, but it's like almost feels like I wrote in my notes emo jam poetry. like
I think that way about Catacombs as well. Very jam poetry.
yeah. And of course it's not about anything you would be stereotypically emo. It's about a series of murders that happened back in the 90s, but it is like such a cool way to like present that. And of course, like you talk about, we talked about One Arm Scissor, and so it's so great, and I've heard that song so many times, and I can never get sick of it when it comes on. It's just so cool and fun. And same for the track right before it, which I'm not sure. I don't know if it's a single, but I know it's a song that I've heard a billion times. Pattern Against User. It's another song that is also really cool and fun, and every time I listen to it, I love it. And it's so well done. And I also had an odd moment with Quarantined, mainly because at some point I went to go get something. I walked down the street to the CVS to get something, or maybe the McDonald's, I don't know, whatever. I was walking down the street and I was walking back. There just happened to have been a very ominous cloud and storm brewing in front of me while the song came on, and I wasn't quite aware whether it was in my headphones or out there, the storm that was raging. So I had my own little weird moment with that, just me. So summertime in Miami, kind of a rainy season.
Storms are brewing.
Summertime everywhere right now. There's tons of storms like all over the place.
Yeah.
Oh man, climate change, yo.
Yeah, it's real, yo. It's real, yo. It's getting real out there.
We're gonna die.
Yep.
The planet's on fucking fire.
Exactly. But in the meantime, we have fun music to listen to. Let's get back around the horn. Talk about some conclusive thoughts on this album. David, what will be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
There were, and I believe Drew can correct me on this, this was the album from At the Drive-In that preceded the formation of the Mars Volta, was it not?
Yes, this was right before their 2001 break, or I shouldn't say breakup because they got back together, so hiatus, I guess. But yes, it was this, and then they didn't make another album till 2005, and in between there, I think D-Louse came out 2004.
I hear teeny tiny flashes of what was going to become the Mars Volta. Flashes here and there.
2003. I'm sorry, not 2004. I was close.
There is a lot of chaotic energy that really makes this album work. That's the thing that I kept coming back to. There is chaotic energy that is just barely under control all over this album, and that's really, really cool. A lot of music in this subgenre usually does not click with me, mainly because I just like something with a little more crunch and a little more precision and technicality. But this really did. There was something that made up for that in the songwriting, in the interesting lyrics, and the stories that were told, and just the overall controlled chaos of the album that made it really, really enjoyable. And the fact that in the same vein that Kill 'Em All was a prelude to Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, this being a prelude to the Mars Volta made a lot of sense. The flashes were there, and I really, really enjoyed this, and I've really enjoyed what came after this from these guys.
Mm-hmm. Jack, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
I had a lot of fun with this. This is definitely the kind of thing to get my blood pumping, to get me, angry and feeling passionate. And I think that David makes a decent point. I feel like I'm just piggybacking off a lot of different opinions here, but it's true. Like a lot of albums from artists in this genre they can run together, I guess I should say. And I'm happy to report that enough songs stick out in this album than do not. And they're very overall just a lot of unique, fun, punchy experimental moments to keep it interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really fantastic things about this album. It works really well. It's creative, it's fun, it's chaotic. It sends me back a bit, kind of a nostalgic wise, because this is my 2000s were filled with a multitude of different bands of different genres. Not all of them I'm proud of, but I think of the ones that I think hold up for me are many of the emo and post-hardcore, since they are tangentially connected, groups that I kind of fell in love with, even if it was just a couple of songs here and there. And this is a nice little deeper dive into one of those groups, and from the album from a couple of songs. So it was nice to kind of get into that. Drew, finally, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
Jack mentions the type of music at 19. I had decidedly gotten more into jazz and ska at 19, so this was definitely my 12.
I was fully infected with the prog virus by then.
Yeah,
fully infected.
Understood.
Jazz and ska were definitely a part of 19 as well. I'm with you.
And 19.
But this was the emo scene in general. Was my love affair, emo and skate punk from the age of 12 13 to probably 17 18 was all I listened to. And not many bands from back then made the cut to regular listening. You have some that made it, that I will never lose my love for, your Saves the Days and your MXPXs and such like that. But At the Drive-In is one of those bands where there's something about their musicianship and what they do. Just Omar Rodriguez and Cedric Bixler together, I think, can create magic. Like David said, there's a certain manic chaos to them. Even when they were in the Mars Volta, to some of the songs, there's a certain manic chaos that's it's trying to be reined in. Because when you point at emo bands, it's sometimes your whiny side of emo. It's your Further Seems Forevers and your Dashboards, which I realize both of my examples include Chris Carrabba, and that was an accident. My bad. But you get that type of whininess in some of it, but then you also get the subgenre has a lot of room for that feeling of manicness. And I think At the Drive-In really encapsulated that. They do speak on a lot of things from a lot of different angles all at once. And I think that's the punk rock side of the emo kids coming out. They want to speak on some things, and they're kind of angry about it a little bit, and they're going to yell at you a little bit. But if you can deal with that, if you can deal with the abrasive vocals, the musicianship, I think, is all there.
I don't find Cedric to be abrasive. I really don't.
I find why I say that is I think on some of the things, it gets a bit into the yelly mic eating side of punk rock, which some people don't dig on. I also love the Gorilla Biscuits and Minor Threat, so I don't know if I'm the one to
Yeah.
make a judgment call either way, I guess. But
Yeah.
because you want to get yelly, listen to a little bit of Gorilla Biscuits, but some
Yeah.
SSD.
Yeah. I was trying to. I found myself over here trying to figure out if you played as or fought Chris Carrabba in the emo game. I don't remember.
No, Chris Carrabba was the first emo game. I think you were trying to save him, and then the second one he ran off
You're
to
saving
an
the
island.
Get Up Kids or something.
Right,
Weren't you?
right. I think no, yeah. The first one you played as him because I remember at the very end, you defeated Aerosmith. Was it Aerosmith had
Okay.
captured the Get Up Kids, and then
To be
the
sodomized
emo
in a
band
dungeon.
won. Right. Aerosmith was sodomizing the Get Up Kids in a dungeon, and then you beat Aerosmith, and then you decapitated Steven Tyler.
That was on the Sega
Why?
Saturn, right?
It was a Flash game.
Yes. Should have been on the
And
Sega
Chris
Saturn.
Carrabba used his 64 pixel long dong to skull fuck Steven Tyler to death, and then took his decapitated skull to an island where you found him in Emo Game 2. Yes, I played all three. Yes, I had no life.
Yes. Oh, fantastic.
Dumb game.
Emo
It
game.
was
So
was-
glad.
I think Hulk Hogan was in it, and R2D2,
Oh, of course it was.
and Rivers.
Drew, are you sure you weren't just playing Mugen?
I wish
Hey, they should have. They should, if they don't already have the emo game sprites in Mugen, they should. I want to see. I want to see Chris Carrabba or one of the other kids. Oh God, Before I want to see them show up on Salty Bet.
Oh my god.
That'll be fun. But that being said,
Oh man.
enough about the emo game. As great as that was, early 2000s internet. Let's get down to the main event of the evening, the moment we've all been waiting for, the haiku reviews. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Haiku numero uno. David, what is your haiku?
Loud and chaotic. Really enjoyable rock. And not obnoxious.
Mm-hmm. Jack D, what is your haiku?
Cavalcade of sound. A 19-year-old me would headbang to the ground.
Yes. Yes. My haiku.
So talented.
Yes. Complex, odd, and fun. A post-hardcore cornerstone with more under hood. Drew, what is your haiku?
The genius here, a composition showcase. Of course, Prague was next.
Mhm. That, of course, wraps up our thoughts on At the Drive-In's Relationship of Command. You can, of course, find it on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers the home game. Do your due diligence and your dude diligence. Yeah, follow along at home. Do your homework. On the Spotify playlist, we'll be
Listen
next
to some tunes, for God's sakes.
Enjoy some music.
Yeah, it's right there all in one list. You can go from the beginning to
You see
all the way
me,
to now.
I don't normally listen to At the Drive-In. I listened to this. I enjoyed it. What's your excuse?
Should have already
What's your
done it.
excuse?
Get you
on
going
that
with your stuff.
yes. On that Spotify playlist will be next week's record. Should already be there, if I remember to do it by the time you listen to it, which I might not, but I'll try. Will be next week's record. It's going to be provided by Jack. Jack, finally, what do you got for us next week?
Next week's album is going to be a personal feel-good of mine, Ta-Da by the Scissor Sisters.
Mm-hmm. So this is going to be fun.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! It's going to be a fun discussion, so look forward to that. That'll be next week, but that's next week, and this is this week. And you can, of course, find us all over the internet. David is at Call Me DJM. Drew is at XDruciferX. Jack is at Jack D. Tyler D. I'm at PD Rave. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us. We're belly.net if you're listening to other shows. We're on I was about to say iTunes again. Or rip in peace. Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts.
Google
Give us
Podcasts.
5 stars. Don't be a hater.
We're also on Spotify. I'm also working on the SoundCloud. We're on SoundCloud. If you want, I'm fixing things up there with proper pictures and descriptions and whatnot. But I did the mass dump, so it's almost all there. I've got to find which ones are missing, but go check it out. Just find us where you can find us. Subscribe, like, share, give us reviews, do all the things. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
So long, and thanks for all the fish.
If anybody can find a playable version of the emo game, I will play through them all again.
Oh, man.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.